Is it possible that we could actually see a merger between two power leagues? But we're not talking about football here. We're talking about basketball. Could we see a merger between two of the mega basketball conferences, the ACC and the Big East? That's what we're going to talk about in this episode of Hoops from the Hills. And we're going to have that conversation right now. What is up, and welcome into this episode of Hoops from the Hills. Thank you for joining the show. I'm your host, Couz, and we serve up top shelf content typically on West Virginia basketball. But today, we're actually talking a little bit of conference realignment. But since, realignment kind of affects everybody, I thought it would be a fit here on the channel. But let's go ahead and dig in. Amanda Krzyzewski over at Front Office Sports, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. If I'm not, Amanda, I apologize if you hear this. But she does a great job covering the business side of sports, realignment, all that. She put out a really good article about how the Big East Commissioner appears to be open about a merger or at least some sort of an agreement with the ACC in basketball. Now, and I'll share that article with you in a minute, but first let's go ahead and talk about some other people in the space who have talked about a merger. First, we had Mike Krzyzewski, former Duke coach, obviously legendary Duke coach, who did his weekly radio show was on his weekly radio show several weeks ago, and he made this comment, and this is coming from an article in 24/7 Sports. It says, quote, "Our conference has been a great one. I think it needs to get better," Coach K said. "We're down results-wise in both men's basketball and football, at least the bowl games." He goes on to say Krzyzewski didn't offer any specifics with regard to how other programs could improve, but he did offer a suggestion on what the ACC could do in order to boost the product, and it doesn't really affect football. College sports sacred cow. And here's the key quote here from Krzyzewski. It says, "I'd like to see the ACC and the Big East talk and form a mega basketball conference," he said. "Imagine if we had the Big East." So that came from a Mike Krzyzewski, who carries, his voice carries some weight here. One of the all-time winningest coaches in college basketball. Maybe he's the winningest coach. I think he actually is. The winningest coach in all of college basketball. Multiple national titles, turned Duke into a blue blood, right? His voice carries some weight, and he wants to see a merger between the ACC and the Big East. Well, he wasn't the only famous coach to make that statement. Recently, Rick Pitino, again, this also coming from 24/7 Sports. Rick Pitino had the following to say. He says this: "Today, football has dominated everything. A bad football game on a Sunday outdraws an NBA playoff game. So we need to do something about that in the Big East. The coaches, I think, are in favor of a super league. I just think the presidents are against it." Now, Pitino obviously coaches at St. John's, right? A team in the Big East. So he's in favor of forming a super league. Mike Krzyzewski, in favor of a merger between the ACC and the Big East to form what? A super league. So this seems to be something that is being talked about. It seems to be talked about by some people with some pretty loud voices, some pretty marquee names in the space. Well, recently, Val Ackerman, the commissioner of the Big East Conference, sat down for an interview with John Alran on his show called Puck. And here's what she had to say. This is coming from the article by Amanda Krzyzewski, and I will do a screen share here, and we'll just read the article together. I think that would be the easiest way to do this. It says, "How viable is a Big East ACC merger? Former Duke men's basketball coach Mike Krzyzewski and current St. John's coach Rick Pitino both recently suggested a conference merger between the Big East and ACC. This weekend, Big East Commissioner Val Ackerman addressed the concept, saying she, quote, appreciated the comments and that she's open to a conversation. She said, and I quote, when you've got two Hall of Famers opening about not only the history of college basketball, but the future of college basketball, you have to listen, end quote. I take very seriously any idea around the future of college basketball, what it means for the Big East, what the Big East should be doing. Ackerman added that she has, quote, great respect for ACC Commissioner gaining momentum. It wouldn't be without significant contractual hurdles from a media rights standpoint. It says this past summer, the Big East inked a 6-year deal with Fox, NBC, and TNT that runs until 2031. The ACC, meanwhile, is locked into an exclusive media deal with ESPN until 2036. In order for a merger to take place before 2036, all 4 media partners, along with the 2 conferences, would likely have to unravel their current contracts and engineer new ones. It's a much more complicated process than simply adding an expansion team to an existing deal. The relationships get even more interesting when considering that ESPN and the Big East, longtime partners, haven't worked together in over 10 years. And it says a rep from ESPN declined to comment. It says the merger could be mutually beneficial, especially given that the ACC boasts traditional college basketball blue bloods in addition to its power conference football status. ACC schools may see a benefit to breaking with the existing ESPN contract to create a new league. After all, the current deal drew criticism for locking the conference into a deal that would be outpaced by the SEC and Big Ten in the next few years. And he also goes on to talk about the ACC being embroiled with lawsuits with Florida State and Clemson. It says, but while Big East schools would almost definitely earn more media rights dollars from an ACC merger, it's unclear if ACC schools would have a similar opportunity. The ESPN deal pays around $30 million annually to each school. And right now, Big East is only making about $10 million per school. ACC schools were concerned in the previous round of expansion that adding conference members dilutes each school's share. And the Big East has only one FBS football playing member in UConn. The last time the league had several FBS football playing schools, it became the victim of conference realignment. In 2013, for example, it lost Syracuse to the ACC. And, of course, me being a fan of West Virginia, I understand. I was around for all of that, followed all of that. West Virginia was one of those teams that was about to left holding the bag, and they had to find a home in the Big 12. It says, for now, Ackerman appears interested in less drastic measures that could be accomplished within the next decade. For years, major basketball conferences have engaged in early season conference challenges where each team from one conference gets matched up with a competitor from the corresponding conference. This season, the ACC engaged in this setup with the SEC, and the Big East has one with the Big 12. Ackerman suggested that those types of partnerships are on the table. Talked about season-long partnerships. The last quote here by Ackerman says, we've got some related ideas that we're hatching here about alliances, about who we should be working with as we look to secure not only the future of the Big East, but the future of college basketball. Now, that's the end of that article, but I'm of the opinion that I don't foresee this happening. And the reason why, it would be so complicated, very complicated. You got 4 different TV networks involved with Fox, NBC, Warner Brothers. So I just don't understand how it would be feasible, along with ESPN, with the ACC. I don't understand how it would be feasible to get everybody working together to come to some resolution here without costing the ACC money. And I think that's the biggest hurdle here. What is in this for the ACC? Yes, it might boost them in basketball, but football, we all know football is driving the realignment bus right now. You can add value in basketball all day long, but how are you not diluting the conference who's making $30 million a year per team by bringing in basketball-only schools? I mean, Stanford and Cal weren't even able to get full shares of media revenue. And they were already power conference teams with football. So you mean to tell me a school with basketball only like Villanova or Marquette or whoever, St. John's, who has only basketball, how are they adding value to the ACC enough to do this? Now, the only way I see this working for me is if there is some sort of a football super league or something formed, or the Power Four move completely away from the NCAA and football only, and then you have an opportunity to do something with the Olympic sports and non-revenue sports. If that happens, then I could see something like this being more manageable. Because if that happens, the TV deals are basically going to blow up anyway, more than likely. But outside of that, I just don't see how this benefits the ACC teams, especially those at the top of the league like Florida State, Clemson, Miami. How do they benefit from this? The teams that take football very, very seriously, even more so than basketball. Now, teams like Duke, they might like this idea. But I just don't see teams like Florida State, Clemson, and others liking this. Now, if Florida State and Clemson get out of the league, then it might be a different conversation. But right now, I just do not see them being on board for a move like this. Now, I received a text from a source of mine, and here's what here's what he had to say. Basically, the talks between the ACC and Big East have been informal, right? So there's nothing super serious going on there. It's all been informal. And the ACC would like the idea of having multiple media partners other than ESPN. They would like to have some sort of an agreement with the three partners of the Big East, like Fox, NBC, and Warner Brothers. That would be attractive to them. But the problem is, how would ESPN agree to that? Right now, ESPN or ACC is locked into that agreement with ESPN through 2036. I don't see ESPN wanting to give any of that up. After all, they own the ACC network. Unless they sub-license some of the football games to the networks I just mentioned somehow, maybe they come to some sort of agreement there. But outside of that, I'm not sure how this makes any sense. Yes, it's more basketball content maybe for ESPN, really good basketball content. But would they have to drop their Big 12 basketball content, which is arguably better than this? Will they have to drop? Because let's face it, the ACC right now, not that great of a league. Now, I know it's goes in cycles. So the ACC will come back and be a really good basketball conference again. I don't doubt that, and they do still have some quality brands, especially with Duke and UNC. But my point is, would they be willing to drop, Big 12 games or SEC games, who right now is the top basketball league in America? Would they be willing to drop games from those conferences to show games from a Big East ACC merger deal? I don't know. And even if you do, how does that help the football side? I just don't see how this makes any logical sense. What I see happening maybe is a scheduling agreement between the two leagues where they play each other more frequently, just like I've talked about on my Couz's Corner football show about, the SEC Big Ten talking about a football scheduling agreement. Maybe that's something that happens here in basketball between the Big East and the ACC. But as far as a full-blown merger goes, I personally just do not see it happening. I don't think it makes any sense. I don't see it as being super viable because it'd just be so complicated with so many media partners involved. The grant of rights deals being, especially in the case of the ACC being, almost more than a decade out. I just don't understand how you make it happen. And I just don't understand how it adds value to the ACC brands that are really, really focused in on football. I don't think it makes a ton of sense. But what do you think? Do you think a Big East ACC merger makes sense? And do you think it's actually feasible? I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section. I want to ask that if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. It really helps that YouTube algorithm, helps me get noticed by more people. Also, please subscribe to Hoops from the Hills if you haven't yet. I'm trying to get my subscriber count up. Still fairly a new channel. I cover primarily West Virginia Mountaineer basketball, but I will also cover topics like this from time to time. So please subscribe. Please share it with your family and friends who might like content like this and who like to watch YouTube. I really appreciate you tuning into this episode. According to YouTube, you may actually like this video right here in the corner of the screen. So check it out. Hope the rest of your day's top shelf and Q Country Roads.